The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 2, Dragon and Soldier. Chapter 9.
No one came storming into the barracks in the pre-dawn darkness before reveille. No one came and grabbed him in the shower or on his way to breakfast or even at breakfast. Everything, in fact, settled nicely into the normal morning routine, from the rotten food to the blaring trumpet calling the recruits to the morning parade ground maneuver. It wasn't until they'd finished the first two drills that the routine was abruptly broken. He spotted the officer angling across the field toward Grisco as the sergeant shouted out the commands that ended the second drill. Grisco set the recruits to attention, and for a moment he and the officer talked quietly together. Then the officer turned to face the trainees, and Jack saw that it was Lieutenant Bashed from the recruitment office.
"All right, listen up,"
Grisco bellowed across the ranks.
"The following fall out and go with Lieutenant Bashed. Bringster, Kana, Lee, Babusu, Montana, Randolph."
The sodden breakfast, which had already been lying heavily on Jack's stomach, suddenly picked up about a ton of extra weight. Heart pounding in his ears, he left his position and moved up through the ranks.
"Form up, 2 by 3,
Bashed ordered as the 6 recruits reached the front. They did so, and Allison and Jami taking the front 2 spots. Jack stepped into place behind Jami, with Rogan Mabusu falling in behind him. Bringster and Lee, both girls, took their places behind Allison. Bashed glanced over their formation, and for a second Jack thought he was going to make some snide comment. But he merely did a crisp military turn and strode off the field. They followed, automatically falling into step with him. As they walked, Jack tried to puzzle out what was going on. His analysis didn't get very far. Jami and Allison were certainly the best of the bunch, which might imply this group had been singled out for special commendation. Problem was, he and Rogan were here too, and neither of them was exactly near the top of the list. As for Bringster and Lee, Jack had noticed them along the way, but neither had struck him as being either particularly good or particularly bad. So ordinary and unnoticeable were they, in fact, that he never even heard their first names. Maybe it was a random sample then. But with 180 boys and only 20 girls in the group, it didn't seem likely that a spin of the dartboard would end up with 3 of each. He was still trying to come up with some explanation when he suddenly realized that Lieutenant Bashed was leading them straight toward the headquarters building. Jack's heart had been starting to quiet down. Now it picked up its pace again. So that was it. They'd figured out somehow that he was last night's casual visitor, and this whole thing was a smokescreen to get him away from the main group. Beneath his shirt, he felt Draco shifting around against his skin. Apparently, the Kada had figured it out too. "Easy," he muttered a warning. The first rule Uncle Virgil had hammered into him when facing the authorities was not to do their job for them.
"You're innocent until they absolutely prove otherwise,"
he had told Jack over and over.
"And for 10 minutes after that, too,"
he'd usually added. There didn't seem to be any extra security hanging around the building as Bashed opened the door and led the way inside. Jack rather expected him to take them straight upstairs to the records room, or maybe to split Jack off from the others and take him up there. To his mild surprise, Bashed led them instead to a first-floor room. To his even greater surprise, the room was filled with computer stations. The stations were unoccupied, but a thin man wearing colonel's insignia was standing near the front besides a double stack of sealed cartons. From the way he eyed them as they filed in, Jack guessed he'd been waiting specifically for them.
"Parade rest,"
Bashed ordered as they formed into their 2 by 3 again.
"Mabusu, tell me about Sunright."
Sunright? Frantically, Jack searched his memory. Then he remembered. It was one of the worlds that had been listed in the current Wynyard's Edge missions section of their training manual. And that was about all he remembered. If Bashed called on him, he was going to be in serious trouble. For a second, it looked like Rogan was already there. The boy floundered. His voice quavered the way it always did whenever he had to talk to a superior officer, and Jack winced in sympathy. Then the mental wheels seemed to catch. "Sunright, sir," Rogan said, his voice still trembling a little. "Third planet of the Gamma Lantern system. Human colonized in 2115. Ceded to the Parpins and the Agri by the Treaty of McDonald Inn.
Loads of sniveling, Bash cut him off. Kana, what are the Edge's interest in the place?
The Edge has been hired by a Parpin Dublight mining colony to protect its interest from a group of Agrist claim jumpers, Allison said briskly. She was on top of this too. That figured. Troops have been in position on the ground for the past 16 months.
Planetary biostats.
Atmosphere is slightly oxygen heavy, but well within human tolerances, Allison said. Gravity is 3% less than Earth's standard. Temperatures average 2 degrees cooler. Bash nodded.
Who are we facing there? Randolph!
The Agri have their local military group. Jami then continued. Mostly volunteers. They're also hired units of the Shamshir mercenaries.
Relative strengths,
Bash asked.
Lee!
Lee seemed to shrink behind the smooth skin of her face. I don't remember, sir, she said in a barely audible voice. For a long second, Bash's eyes burned into her as if he was trying to set her on fire. Then the glare flicked over her shoulder.
Bringster, what's our strength?
Out of the corner of his eye, Jack saw the girl wince. I think we have 800 troops on the ground, sir.
You think?
We have 800 troops, sir, she said more firmly this time.
And the Shamshir?
Bash asked, his eyes finally focusing on Jack.
Montana!
Jack braced himself to follow Lee down in flames. But even as he opened his mouth to tell Bash he didn't know, there were 7 rapid pinpricks on the back of his forearm, the urgent tapping of a Kadah claw. They have 700, sir, he said, hoping he was reading Dracos' signal right. He held his breath. Bash's eyes flicked again to Lee, as if silently pointing out that she was the only one not up to speed here. Then he turned and nodded curtly to the colonel. Sir! He stepped back as the colonel came forward, and Jack let out a silent sigh of relief. He hadn't realized that during all those hours of study, Dracos had actually been reading the manual over his shoulder. Lucky for him. Over his shoulder, on top of his shoulder, whatever.
My name is Colonel Ecor,
the other introduced himself.
Late yesterday, we received word from Sunright that the Shamshir have made a major blunder. We've been nibbling around the edges of their main inner-world transmission station, so they've set up a new one. It's in a mountainous area marked as November 6 on our maps.
He looked them all over, as if expecting them to all know where November 6 was. Jack tried to remember if the mission section had included a map of the Sunright area, but he couldn't.
The convenient part about that is we happen to have a forward observation post in that region,
Elcor went on.
That means if we have to put some specialized computer equipment in there, we'll be able to tap directly into all their off-planet transmissions.
He jerked his head back at the boxes he'd been standing beside where the group came in.
Those are the computers,
he said.
You are now the computer operators. Any questions?
There was a moment of uncertain silence.
Why aren't there any questions?
Elcor demanded.
You all already know everything?
Jami lifted a hesitant hand. Sir, I don't know anything about communications work.
That's better,
Elcor rumbled.
Fact is, none of you do. That's why you're here. Lieutenant Basht will be running you through 3 days of training that will include electronic eavesdropping, decoding, and some preliminary analysis techniques. Plus, giving you all the access codes you'll need to work out the systems,
Basht added.
By the time you're done, each of you will be a fully qualified Wynyard's Edge systems operator. I presume none of you objects to a change in specialties,
Elcor said, lifting his eyebrows.
If you do, say so now. Plenty of other recruits marching back and forth out there for us to choose from.
The implications were obvious. Stay here and do inside work, or else go back outside and sweat. There was another silence from the group, this one a lot more positive than the last.
Good,
Elcor said briskly.
The 6 of you are now designated as Technical Squad Tango 5 Zulu. Carry on, Lieutenant.
He strode from the room.
All right,
Bash said, gesturing toward the computer stations.
Everyone pick a station and let's get started.
They took a short break for lunch and an even shorter one for dinner. Throughout the day, the noise outside rose and fell as the rest of the recruits were drilled and exercised, then taken away for more target practice, then brought back for more drills and exercise. The noise inside the room, consisting mostly of Bash's steady drone of information, seemed to go on forever. The sky was already darkening when they were finally turned loose. I guess that's what they mean by information overload, Jack commented to Dracos as he trudged alone toward the barracks. My head is so full it hurts. Perhaps the next 2 days will be easier, Draco suggested from his shoulder. You seem to have been given most of the necessary information. Yeah, but the next thing will be drilling us on how to use it, Jack pointed out. That's always a lot harder than just memorizing facts and figures. He glanced down at the dragon's head, just visible beneath his collar opening. Speaking of facts and figures, thanks for bailing me out when Bash started lobbing pan-fried rocks into our laps. I'm amazed you even bothered reading all that stuff, let alone memorized it. I am a poet warrior of the Kada, Dracos reminded him. The gathering of military information is part of my profession. Yeah, maybe, Jack said suspiciously. Let me guess, you made up a little song about the Edge's expeditions, right? There was a short pause, and then the dragon's voice rose in gentle melody from beneath his shirt. On Eagle's Rock, 200 strong, where humans fight a Trin-Thang throng, the dragon sang. 800 fight at sunrise here, Agrai and 7 friend Shamshir. Jack rolled his eyes. Words fail me. Thank you, Draco said dryly. There are 30 more verses if you would care to hear them. Some other time. They walked in silence a few more steps. I trust you realize, Draco said at last, that this is a trap. Oh, I know, Jack assured him. Let's hear your take on it. They know that someone tried to break into their system last night, the dragon said. They suspect it was you, but are not certain. They therefore offer you the chance to learn their access codes in the hope that you will try again tonight. Not bad, Jack said. You're getting better at this sneaky stuff. I will take that as a compliment, Draco said gravely. Thank you. You're welcome, Jack said. Only one thing. Unless they also think I'm dumber than dirt soup, they know I won't try another midnight stroll, not with them alerted like this. What then do they expect? I figure there are 2 possibilities, Jack said. One, that I'll go straight off the Chipats meter and try to break into the records while Bash is standing right there teaching me how to do it. What is a chutzpah meter? Chutzpah is sheer blatant nerve, Jack growled. Having to stop every third sentence to explain something was starting to get really old. The minute they were back on the SNA, he promised himself he was going to sit the dragon down in front of the dictionary and not let him up until he'd memorized it. The classic definition is a kid on trial for murdering both parents who pleads for mercy on the grounds that he's an orphan. An interesting term, Draco said thoughtfully. An equally interesting concept. What is the other possibility? That I'll wait until we get to sunlight and try to tap into the computer at the outpost they're sending us to. Will an outpost computer have the information on the Jin 90 fighters that we seek? I don't know, Jack said. I hope so, since that's mostly what I am planning on doing. Mostly? Right, Jack said, smiling tightly. You see, they figure they'll just put a watchdog program on the computers before I arrive. That way, the minute I try to break in, they'll have me. But you will instead be using your special access system. Actually, we can do even better than that, Jack told him. The local Edge group will have to have a mainframe set up somewhere, and it certainly won't be off at some little observation post. It will be in their main encampment. Right, Jack agreed. And since the outpost computer has to be able to talk to that one, it'll need a transmission pathway. And unless they went to the trouble of stringing a cable out into the middle of nowhere, that means a radio link. Draco stirred suddenly on his skin. The SNA! Bingo, Jack said, nodding. Once I give Uncle Verge the access codes, he can tap into the signal and pull up whatever the mainframe has on Jin 90 fighters. And since I won't have used the outpost computer to do it, they won't be able to trace it back to me. Dracos was silent a moment.
That will require us to travel to Sunright,
He pointed out.
You will be entering a combat zone.
That is the downside to this whole thing, Jack admitted. What do you know about observation outposts? Do they get attacked much?
That depends on the situation,
Dracos said.
If the outpost is not considered a danger, it may be left alone as a ranging marker for artillery attacks.
And if it is considered a danger?
It will be destroyed,
Dracos said.
As quickly as possible.
Jack grimaced. Suppose eavesdropping on the other side's communications would fall into that second category?
Correct,
Dracos said.
Assuming the other side is aware of it.
Figures, Jack sighed. Okay, so the goal is to get there, pull the records, and disappear before the Shamshir figure it out.
If they have not done so already,
Dracos warned.
Perhaps it would be better to leave now and try a different group.
For a long moment, Jack was sorely tempted. He already had his comm clip handy, hidden in his waist beneath his shirt. He could just keep walking until they reached the perimeter, jump the fence, and have Uncle Verge and the SNA in and out before the Edge even knew what had happened. Then it would be out to another mercenary group, one that wasn't already suspicious of him like the Edge was. He had enough fake IDs aboard the ship to try a dozen of them if he had to. But he'd already invested 6 days here, not to mention the time they'd spent getting to Carrion in the first place. And time was definitely something they couldn't afford to waste. No, he said, trying to feel like he really meant it. We've come this far. Let's see it through.
You do this for my people,
Draco said quietly.
Once again, I am in your debt.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't start writing checks just yet if I were you, Jack warned.
Pardon?
Jack closed his eyes. Skip it,